You know, I feel like I've spent so much time telling other people's stories, it's time I told my own. My father was born in 1944 in Jersey City, New Jersey, which explains why he was such a fucking goon of a man. My father's mother, her name was Helen. She was a Meryl Streep, Devil Wears Prada, fashion buyer, kind of broad, as he would say. I never met her. We called her the Big Kahuna because she would send us money every now and again, but I never met the woman. As for my father's father, he would tell you, "That piece of shit worked out on me the day I was born." And so my father never knew his father, and that was obviously a source of much of his anger, amongst other things. My father always considered himself a bit of a hard body. During most of my childhood, he was 350 pounds and he was 6'1". So anytime I saw James Gandolfini on television watching The Sopranos, he reminded me of my dad. My dad had this towering presence about him, but also this ridiculous charisma. One of the funniest people I ever met in my life, and that's why I tell stories about him so often. He loved music, he loved art. He got involved in a lot of criminal shit in the 70s. He used to brag to me about selling drugs to Lou Reed at Studio 54. He claimed to be a major drug dealer in the 70s. That's something him and my mom used to argue about constantly. Whenever they'd start their harangues and the screaming would start, my mom would be like, "My husband Herbert Grossman sold grass." And my father would respond, "Mercy, the statute of limitations ran out on that years ago." He told me that he stopped selling drugs after a few of his friends dealt with some Dominicans, and he thought, nah, I don't want to go to this. Something fishy about this. They ended up going to the deal and getting killed, and my father stayed home and got a call saying that he had to stop doing what he was doing. So he did, and he pursued psychology and became a psychologist. So my father always had money growing up, but my mother, not the case. Her parents were Jewish Italian Holocaust survivors. Jewish Italians do exist. Look it up. Primo Levi, he wrote a book. Prior to my grandparents being in Auschwitz, they were very dark, disturbed people, and an attempted genocide didn't exactly make things better, so my mother grew up very rough. My mother was abused her entire childhood, and that would unfortunately become a trend in her life. My mother was a flower child. She was a hippie chick, you know, she was a free spirit, which is a polite way of saying she had a lot of affairs and her judgment wasn't always the best, to say the least, and she did a lot of really irrational things. She did a lot of irrational shit that fucked our family up for years to come. You know, she had health problems from as early as a teenager. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and it was bad, you know, but what we didn't know back then is that her mind was also fucked. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, and her health and the things that she would do as a result of her health was always a source of pain in our family, because she would give all our money away to somebody, or she would fucking do something. And I'm gonna tell you all these stories, but I just wanna kind of set the tone here for what you're about to learn about me. The way my parents met is actually really funny. My mother was 13, my dad was 26. Don't crack wise. And she was protesting the Vietnam War, and he was working at this office building, and she threw a fucking Molotov cocktail into the fucking deal. Talk about peaceful protest, am I right? Years later, my father was working as an on-staff psychologist, and my mother was just starting her fucking whatever psychologists do in terms of residency type shit. And she was attacked by her patient, and my father ran in the room, broke the guy's fucking arm, and then looked at her like, "Didn't you throw a Molotov into my building all those years ago?" And what do you know, it was love at first sight. My mother had two other kids that were born after me. They weren't born healthy. She also had a half-brother named Nick, and you know, he was into that Goomba Italian shit, so he was into organized crime at a very low level, mind you. But one of my first memories is actually my brother's funeral. Uncle Nick, he had bought one of those giant fucking Toys R Us giraffes and took me out to pizza and all this shit. That's one of my earliest memories. We ended up in the Bronx in the exact same apartment that my mother grew up in. So it was almost like we were cursed in a way by living in that apartment. By that point, my mother had taken everything from my father, taken him to God knows how many bankruptcies, all of his money, all of his hopes, all of his dreams. They spent the rest of their lives chasing all this get-rich-quick shit in order to kind of get us out of that situation, but it never happened. So growing up in that house, it was almost like we were doomed to repeat the shit that happened to my mother when she was growing up. My room was actually my mother's old room, which is weird to think about. A lot of this shit I've never talked about before, so this is gonna be, you know, cathartic for me, I guess, in some sense. And for you, I hope it gives an idea as to who I am as a person, where I come from. I don't believe in all this trauma shit. This is shit that happened, and it's real. And I'm gonna tell it to you as real as I can, as real as I remember. And I hope you like it.